the moment a woman realizes that all she truly has left is God. Something sacred awakens inside her. Not desperation, destiny, not weakness, divine alignment. When every voice grows silent, when every hand that once promised support lets go, when the familiar comfort of human assurance disappears, heaven steps closer. That is the moment when faith stops being a word she speaks and becomes the air she breathes. That is the moment when everything changes. There's a kind of strength that cannot be learned in comfort. It is forged in lonely prayers, in quiet tears that no one sees, in midnight conversations with God when the world has turned its back. When a woman has no one but God, she discovers who God really is. Not just a concept, not just a Sunday belief, but a living, breathing presence that walks with her through every storm. She learns that God does not abandon her when people leave. He does not betray her when systems fail. He does not forget her when doors close. He becomes her shelter, her counselor, her provider, her defender, her peace, and her future. When a woman discovers that isolation is not punishment, but divine preparation, her entire perspective shifts. What once felt like rejection becomes redirection. What once felt like abandonment becomes alignment. Many times, the hardest seasons in a woman's life are not meant to break her, but to build her. God often removes familiar supports, comfortable relationships, and predictable routines, not to harm her, but to strengthen her dependence on him. In those moments when everything familiar falls away, she finally learns what truly sustains her. She realizes that her faith cannot survive on borrowed strength, borrowed belief, or borrowed confidence. It must become personal, rooted, and unshakable. At first, isolation feels uncomfortable. Silence feels loud. Waiting feels endless. Questions begin to rise in her heart. She wonders why others seem surrounded by help while she feels left behind. She may even question her worth, her direction, and her prayers. But beneath that discomfort, something sacred is happening. God is clearing space. He is removing distractions that once stole her attention and voices that once shaped her decisions more than his truth. He is gently teaching her how to hear him clearly without interference. The absence of noise becomes the birthplace of clarity. In isolation, she begins to see herself honestly. Without external validation or constant comparison, she is forced to confront her fears, insecurities, habits, and hidden wounds. Instead of running from them, she learns to bring them into God's presence. Healing begins where honesty lives. God starts rebuilding her character, strengthening her discipline, and refining her mindset. The woman who once avoided stillness now learns to value it. She realizes that growth often happens quietly before it ever becomes visible publicly. Divine preparation reshapes her priorities. What once felt urgent loses its power. What once distracted her no longer controls her. She learns to wait without anxiety and trust without proof. Patience begins to mature her spirit. Faith stops being emotional and becomes intentional. She learns that obedience matters even when no one is watching. Integrity becomes her identity, not performance. This season teaches her how to stand strong even when affirmation is absent. Isolation also exposes dependency patterns. She begins to recognize where she leaned too heavily on people, approval, comfort, or control. God lovingly replaces those fragile foundations with spiritual stability. She learns that people can change, situations can shift, but God remains constant. This realization brings freedom. She stops fearing loss because her security is no longer tied to what can disappear. She becomes emotionally grounded and spiritually anchored. As preparation deepens, discernment sharpens. She becomes more sensitive to what aligns with her values and what drains her spirit. She no longer tolerates confusion, compromise, or chaos. She learns to protect her peace and guard her energy. Boundaries become wisdom, not walls. Her decisions become intentional rather than impulsive. She understands that not every opportunity is an assignment and not every connection is a covenant. This season also strengthens her prayer life. Prayer becomes her refuge, not her last option. She learns how to communicate honestly with God, not hiding her doubts, frustrations, or fears. She learns to listen as much as she speaks. In this sacred exchange, her faith deepens and her confidence grows. She realizes that God is closer than she ever imagined. His presence becomes her comfort. His promises become her anchor. Preparation builds endurance. She learns how to remain faithful even when results are delayed. She learns how to stay hopeful when answers are silent. She learns how to trust when the path feels uncertain. These internal victories shape her into a woman of resilience. She no longer collapses under pressure because her strength comes from within. She understands that seasons of invisibility often prepare for seasons of impact. One day she looks back and recognizes that what once felt like isolation was actually protection. God was shielding her from distractions that would have delayed her destiny. He was strengthening her for responsibilities she was not yet ready to carry. He was aligning her heart with his purpose. The woman who emerges from this season is wiser, calmer, stronger, and more spiritually grounded. Her confidence is no longer loud. It is rooted. Her peace is no longer fragile. It is steady. She realizes that divine preparation never wastes pain, time, or silence. Every tear shaped her compassion. Every waiting moment strengthened her trust. Every lonely night deepened her prayer. The isolation refined her character and clarified her direction. She no longer fears being alone because she understands that God meets her there. She walks forward with quiet authority, knowing that the same season that stretched her also strengthened her. This revelation changes how she approaches future challenges. Instead of resisting difficult seasons, she leans into growth. Instead of questioning God's absence, she looks for his purpose. She understands that preparation often looks like delay, but delay does not mean denial. It means development. And when the next door opens, she will walk through it prepared, not pressured, equipped, not exhausted, confident, not confused. Isolation was never her punishment. It was her divine invitation to become who she was always meant to be. When a woman learns that true strength is built in quiet dependence on God, her entire understanding of power begins to change. Strength no longer looks like control, perfection, or constant independence. It no longer depends on applause, recognition, or external approval. Instead, strength becomes rooted in surrender, trust, and consistent reliance on God's presence. In a world that celebrates self-sufficient, invisible success, this kind of strength feels hidden, almost invisible, yet is the most unshakable form of power a woman can carry. Quiet dependence teaches her how to stop striving and start trusting. She learns that she does not have to carry every burden alone or solve every problem by force. She begins to release the pressure of always needing to appear strong in front of others. In the privacy of prayer, she allows herself to be honest, vulnerable, and real. She brings her fears, doubts, disappointments, and unanswered questions to God instead of suppressing them. In that sacred space, God does not judge her weakness. He strengthens it. Dependence reshapes her inner posture. Instead of reacting emotionally to every challenge, she learns to pause and seek divine wisdom. Instead of rushing decisions out of fear, she learns to wait with faith. Her patience grows because her trust deepens. She begins to understand that God's timing is not slow, but intentional. What once triggered anxiety now invites prayer. What once caused panic now builds perseverance. Her spiritual reflex becomes faith instead of fear. Quiet strength is not loud or dramatic. It is steady, calm, and grounded. It shows itself in how she responds under pressure, how she treats others when misunderstood, and how she maintains peace when circumstances are uncertain. This kind of strength does not seek validation because it is rooted in divine assurance. She no longer needs people to confirm her worth because she knows who sustains her. Her confidence becomes internal rather than external. As she grows in dependence, her perspective changes. She realizes that human strength has limits, but God's strength has no boundaries. She stops measuring success by how much she controls and starts measuring growth by how much she trusts. Surrender no longer feels like weakness. It feels like freedom. Letting go becomes a form of faith. Trusting God with outcomes becomes an act of courage. She understands that strength is not about holding everything together. It is about trusting the one who already holds everything. Her faith deepens through consistency, not emotion. Quiet prayer becomes her daily nourishment. Worship becomes her reset. Gratitude becomes her mindset. Even when feelings fluctuate, her commitment remains steady. She learns that spiritual maturity is built through repetition, discipline, and obedience, not occasional inspiration. This consistency strengthens her character and stabilizes her emotions. Dependence also sharpens humility. She recognizes that every victory, breakthrough, and blessing comes from God, not personal effort alone. This keeps pride from corrupting her heart and comparison from stealing her joy. She celebrates progress without becoming arrogant. She receives correction without becoming defensive. Humility allows her to remain teachable and spiritually sensitive. As her strength grows internally, her resilience increases externally. She no longer collapses under pressure because her foundation is secure. Storms may shake her environment, but they do not destroy her identity. She becomes emotionally balanced, spiritually grounded, and mentally focused. She learns how to recover quickly from disappointment instead of dwelling in defeat. Her hope becomes durable, not fragile. Quiet dependence also transforms her relationships. She stops expecting people to fulfill needs that only God can satisfy. This releases unrealistic expectations and emotional pressure from her connections. She learns how to love freely instead of desperately. She becomes healthier in boundaries, communication, and discernment. Her relationships become partnerships, not dependencies. Over time, she notices that peace begins to guard her heart. Even when circumstances remain uncertain, her spirit remains settled. This peace is not denial, it is trust. It is the confidence that God is working even when evidence is unseen. It allows her to move forward without panic, to wait without frustration, and to believe without fear. This kind of strength carries quiet authority. Her words carry weight because her life carries consistency. Her presence brings stability because her spirit is anchored. She influences others not by force, but by example. People feel safe around her because she radiates calm assurance. Her faith becomes contagious because it is authentic. She learns that dependence does not make her weak. It makes her wise. It teaches when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to hold on and when to release. Wisdom becomes her companion. Discernment becomes her guide. Confidence becomes her natural state. One day she realizes that the strength she once searched for in achievement, relationships, and validation was always available through divine connection. God was shaping her quietly, patiently, faithfully. The battles she survived strengthened her trust. The waiting seasons deepened her roots. The unanswered prayers refined her faith. Every moment of surrender built invisible strength. She now walks with steady confidence, not rushed ambition. She carries peace, not pressure. She moves with clarity, not confusion. Her dependence on God has not limited her. It has liberated her. She understands that true power flows from trust, not control. And this quiet strength will sustain her through every season of life. When God begins to rebuild a woman's identity by removing human labels, a profound inner transformation takes place. So much of how a woman sees herself is shaped by what people say, how she has been treated, what she has survived, and what she has been told she can or cannot become. Over time, these external voices become internal beliefs. She may carry names that were never meant to define her: rejected, broken, forgotten, unworthy, too much, not enough. These labels quietly shape her confidence, her decisions, and her expectations. But when God steps in and gently removes those labels, he creates space to reveal her true identity. Without the constant noise of opinions, comparison, and expectations, she finally begins to hear God's voice clearly. The silence may feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, because she has grown used to measuring herself through others' approval or criticism. But in that quiet space, truth begins to rise. God reminds her who she is beyond what she has experienced. He speaks worth where wounds once lived. He speaks purpose where shame once lingered. He speaks destiny where fear once dominated. Rebuilding identity is not instant. It is a process of healing, unlearning, and renewal. She begins to recognize patterns of thinking that were never rooted in truth. She becomes aware of how past disappointments influence her self-image. Slowly, God replaces distorted beliefs with clarity. Instead of seeing herself through failure, she begins to see herself through growth. Instead of seeing herself through rejection, she begins to see herself through divine acceptance. Instead of seeing herself through fear, she begins to see herself through faith. As this transformation unfolds, her confidence stabilizes. She no longer depends on compliments to feel valuable or criticism to feel defeated. Her worth becomes anchored internally, not externally. She learns that identity does not come from performance, appearance, achievements, or approval. It comes from divine purpose. This realization releases R, from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove herself. She no longer needs to compete, compare, or chase validation. She becomes comfortable in who she is becoming. God also heals the emotional wounds that shaped her old identity. Hurt from betrayal, abandonment, rejection, or failure can quietly shape how a woman views herself and others. These wounds create defensive behaviors, fear-based decisions, and emotional walls. As God rebuilds her identity, he gently restores trust, courage, and self-worth. She learns how to forgive without carrying bitterness. She learns how to love without losing herself. She learns how to trust without fear controlling her choices. As identity becomes clearer, her boundaries become healthier. She begins to recognize what aligns with her values and what compromises her peace. She no longer tolerates relationships or environments that diminish her growth. She learns how to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Her self-respect strengthens. She understands that protecting her identity is not selfish, it is wisdom. Her voice changes as well. She begins to speak differently about herself, her future, and her possibilities. Negative self-talk loses its authority. Hope replaces hesitation. Faith replaces doubt. She no longer limits herself by what she used to be or what others once said. She begins to expect growth, healing, and progress. Her mindset expands. This rebuilt identity also reshapes how she handles challenges. Instead of collapsing, Angie under pressure, she responds with confidence. Instead of internalizing failure, she extracts lessons. Instead of fearing rejection, she trusts divine protection. She understands that setbacks do not define her, they refine her. Her resilience increases because her foundation is no longer fragile. God-centered identity creates emotional freedom. She no longer lives under the weight of comparison or perfectionism. She no longer feels pressured to meet unrealistic expectations. She gives herself grace while pursuing excellence. She accepts growth as a journey, not a demand. This balance creates peace within her soul. As her identity becomes rooted in truth, her purpose becomes clearer. She begins to recognize her gifts, passions, and calling. She no longer chases what does not align with her values. She makes decisions that honor her future instead of feeding temporary desires. Her direction becomes intentional. Her confidence becomes steady. One of the most powerful outcomes of identity restoration is authenticity. She no longer pretends to be someone she is not to fit into spaces that cannot honor her growth. She embraces her uniqueness without apology. She carries humility without insecurity. She walks with quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself. Over time, she realizes that the labels she once carried were never her destiny. They were experiences, not identity. They were chapters, not conclusions. God used the silence, the separation, and the healing process to remind her of her true worth. She understands that her life is not defined by what she survived, but by what she is becoming. This clarity transforms her relationships, choices, and future vision. She no longer settles for less than what aligns with her purpose. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she understands who she is. She no longer doubts her value because she knows where it comes from. When human labels fall away, divine identity rises. And in that identity, she finds peace, strength, clarity, confidence, and freedom. When loneliness becomes an invitation to intimacy with God, a woman begins to experience a transformation that reshapes how she understands connection, comfort, and belonging. What once felt like emptiness slowly becomes sacred space. The quiet moments that once amplified her loneliness now become opportunities for deep conversation with God. Instead of viewing solitude as something to escape, she begins to see it as a place where healing, clarity, and renewal unfold. Loneliness often exposes the areas where the heart longs for reassurance, validation, and companionship. In the absence of people, these desires surface more clearly. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because it reveals emotional needs that may have been hidden under busyness or distraction. But rather than filling the silence with noise or unhealthy attachments, she learns to bring those needs directly to God. She discovers that God is not distant or unreal, able but present, attentive, and compassionate. As intimacy with God grows, prayer becomes more than routine. It becomes relationship. She no longer speaks in rehearsed phrases or religious language. She talks honestly about her fears, her hopes, her frustrations, and her questions. She listens quietly for guidance, comfort, and reassurance. This two-way connection deepens trust and strengthens spiritual sensitivity. She begins to recognize God's voice in subtle ways through peace, conviction, clarity, and inner assurance. In this sacred connection, emotional healing begins to take root. Loneliness often carries hidden pain from rejection, abandonment, or disappointment. God gently touches these wounds with truth and love. He reminds her that she is never unseen, unheard, or forgotten. His presence brings security where insecurity once lived. Over time, the ache of loneliness softens as divine companionship fills the empty spaces of her heart. Intimacy with God also reshapes how she views herself. Instead of seeing herself as lacking or incomplete, she begins to understand her value through divine love rather than human affirmation. She learns that her worth does not depend on who stays or who leaves. Her confidence becomes rooted in God's acceptance, not people's approval. This realization frees her from chasing validation and allows her to rest in identity. The deeper the intimacy grows, the more peace replaces anxiety. She becomes less dependent on external reassurance and more anchored in internal stability. When challenges arise, she turns toward God instead of panicking or withdrawing. She learns how to release control and trust divine wisdom. This emotional stability allows her to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. As her connection with God strengthens, discernment increases. She becomes more aware of what aligns with her spiritual growth and what drains her energy. She learns to guard her heart and protect her peace. Loneliness no longer pushes her into unhealthy relationships or distractions because her heart is already fulfilled through divine companionship. She becomes selective, intentional, and grounded in her choices. Intimacy also fuels spiritual confidence. Knowing God personally transforms how she prays, how she believes, and how she lives. Her faith becomes experiential, not theoretical. She trusts God's guidance because she recognizes his voice. She moves with clarity instead of confusion. Her obedience flows naturally from trust rather than fear. This sacred connection strengthens her emotional resilience. Even when people disappoint or circumstances shift, her foundation remains stable. She understands that human relationships can fluctuate, but divine presence remains constant. This consistency builds security in her soul. She becomes less afraid of being alone because she knows she is never truly alone. As loneliness transforms into intimacy, gratitude grows. She begins to appreciate the quiet moments instead of fearing them. She finds beauty in stillness and strength in silence. She recognizes that these moments shape her inner world and deepen her spiritual maturity. She learns to enjoy her own company without loneliness controlling her emotions. This intimacy also reshapes her future relationships. Because her heart is already fulfilled, she no longer seeks people to complete her or heal her wounds. She enters relationships from wholeness rather than need. This allows her to love freely without attachment, fear, or dependency. Her relationships become healthier, balanced, and emotionally safe. Over time, she notices that her faith carries depth and authenticity. Her prayers are confident. Her decisions are grounded. Her peace is consistent. Her perspective is mature. She walks with quiet assurance, knowing that God walks with her. The loneliness that once threatened her now strengthens her. She realizes that solitude was not abandonment, but invitation. An invitation to discover divine companionship, inner healing, and spiritual clarity. What once felt empty now feels sacred. What once hurt now heals. What once isolated now strengthens. In embracing intimacy with God, she discovers that her heart was never meant to be filled by temporary sources. It was designed for eternal connection. And in that connection, she finds peace, identity, stability, and unshakable hope. When distractions are removed and the heart becomes centered on God, discernment begins to sharpen in powerful ways. A woman starts seeing clearly not only what is happening around her, but what is happening within her. The noise that once clouded her judgment slowly fades, allowing wisdom to rise. Without constant influence from opinions, pressure, comparison, and emotional impulses, her decisions become calmer, wiser, and more intentional. Discernment becomes her inner compass, guiding her toward peace, alignment, and purpose in seasons filled with distraction. It is easy to confuse urgency with importance and emotion with truth. A woman may say yes too quickly, trust too easily, or attach herself to situations that feel good in the moment but harm her long-term growth. But when life slows down and distractions fade, clarity begins to emerge. She starts recognizing patterns that once went unnoticed. She becomes aware of what drains her energy, compromises her peace, and weakens her focus. This awareness is the foundation of spiritual maturity. Discernment teaches her to pause instead of rushing. Instead of reacting emotionally, she learns to reflect prayerfully. She begins to ask deeper questions. Does this align with my values? Does this bring peace or confusion? Does this move me closer to my purpose or further from it? These quiet internal checks prevent unnecessary struggles and emotional exhaustion. She learns that not everything that feels right is right, and not every opportunity is meant for her. As her discernment strengthens, her boundaries become healthier. She no longer feels guilty for protecting her time, energy, and emotional space. She understands that boundaries are not barriers. They are safeguards. They preserve her peace and protect her spiritual growth. She becomes comfortable saying no without over-explaining and saying yes without fear. Her choices become intentional rather than reactive. This clarity also transforms her relationships. She becomes more selective about who she allows into her inner world. She recognizes the difference between connections that nourish her spirit and those that drain it. She no longer seeks validation through unhealthy attachments or approval-based relationships. Instead, she values mutual respect, emotional safety, and spiritual alignment. Her relationships become healthier because they are chosen with wisdom rather than need. Discernment also protects her from unnecessary conflict. She learns when to speak and when to remain silent. She understands that not every battle deserves her energy. She becomes less reactive to negativity, criticism, and misunderstanding. Peace becomes her priority rather than proving a point. This emotional maturity strengthens her leadership and influence. As distractions fade, her sensitivity to God's guidance increases. She becomes more attentive to inner nudges, convictions, and peace signals. Her spiritual awareness sharpens. She learns to trust her intuition as it aligns with wisdom and faith. This clarity strengthens her confidence in decision-making. She no longer second-guesses herself excessively because she trusts the discernment she has developed. Discernment also reshapes her priorities. She becomes focused on what truly matters instead of what simply feels urgent. Her time management improves because her direction is clear. She invests energy in growth, healing, purpose, and meaningful relationships. She stops wasting emotional energy on chaos, drama, and distraction. As this wisdom grows, she becomes emotionally stable. She understands her triggers, patterns, and vulnerabilities. Instead of allowing emotions to control her actions, she learns how to process them wisely. Emotional intelligence strengthens her self-awareness and self-control. She becomes balanced, thoughtful, and steady. Discernment also builds courage. She becomes confident in making difficult decisions even when they are unpopular or uncomfortable. She understands that choosing peace sometimes requires walking away from familiar but unhealthy environments. She learns that growth often requires separation. This courage protects her future and preserves her integrity. Over time, the fruit of discernment becomes visible in her lifestyle. Her life feels less chaotic and more intentional. Her choices bring stability rather than stress. Her relationships bring nourishment rather than exhaustion. Her mind feels calmer because she is no longer constantly overwhelmed by noise and pressure. Her spirit feels lighter because she is walking in alignment. She realizes that distractions once blurred her vision and delayed her growth, but clarity has restored her confidence and strengthened her wisdom. She understands that discernment is not about perfection. It is about awareness, alignment, and intentional living. When distractions are removed, wisdom has space to speak. And when wisdom guides her steps, peace follows her path. When faith replaces fear as the default response, a woman's inner world begins to stabilize in powerful ways. Instead of being driven by anxiety, uncertainty, or worst-case thinking, she learns to respond to life with trust, calm, and confidence. This shift does not happen overnight. It develops through repeated moments of choosing faith over panic, surrender over control, and trust over worry. Over time, faith becomes her natural reflex, shaping how she thinks, decides, and responds. Fear often comes from the need to control outcomes, protect against disappointment, and avoid uncertainty. It magnifies problems and minimizes hope. It creates mental pressure, emotional fatigue, and spiritual doubt. But when faith begins to dominate, her perspective changes. She understands that not everything is hers to manage, fix, or predict. She learns that God's guidance is steady even when circumstances feel unstable. This awareness softens her need for control and strengthens her willingness to trust. As faith grows, her internal dialogue transforms. Instead of rehearsing worries, she began to declare hope. Instead of expecting failure, she begins to anticipate growth. Instead of assuming the worst, she opens her heart to possibility. Her thoughts become intentional rather than reactive. She learns to challenge fear-based thinking with truth, wisdom, and spiritual clarity. This mental shift brings peace and emotional balance. Faith also reshapes how she handles uncertainty. Life rarely offers complete clarity, yet faith gives her the courage to move forward without full visibility. She learns to take steps guided by trust rather than fear of mistakes. Even when outcomes are unclear, she believes that God's presence remains constant. This trust reduces anxiety and builds confidence. She understands that delays do not mean denial and that challenges do not mean abandonment. As faith becomes her default response, her emotional reactions stabilize. She no longer panics at setbacks or collapses under pressure. Instead, she pauses, reflects, prays, and responds wisely. Emotional maturity develops as she learns how to regulate stress and manage disappointment. She becomes less reactive and more grounded. This stability allows her to navigate relationships, responsibilities, and challenges with calm assurance. Faith also strengthens resilience. Instead of being discouraged by obstacles, she views them as opportunities for growth. She learns how to adapt, persist, and remain hopeful even during difficult seasons. Her confidence no longer depends on comfort or certainty. It depends on trust. This inner resilience makes her mentally strong and emotionally steady. As fear loses influence, courage increases. She becomes more willing to pursue growth, set boundaries, and make bold decisions. She understands that growth often requires stepping outside of comfort zones. Faith gives her the confidence to move forward even when risk is present. She learns that fear shrinks potential, but faith expands possibility. This transformation also improves her relationships. When fear no longer dominates, she communicates more clearly, loves more freely, and trusts more wisely. She stops projecting insecurity and anxiety onto others. She becomes emotionally healthy and secure in connection. Her relationships become calmer, more stable, and more balanced. Faith also shapes her spiritual discipline. Prayer becomes consistent rather than reactive. Gratitude becomes habitual rather than conditional. Worship becomes a source of strength rather than a response to crisis. These practices strengthen her spiritual foundation and reinforce trust daily. Over time, faith becomes deeply rooted rather than situational. This internal shift impacts how she views the future. Instead of fearing uncertainty, she embraces possibility. She becomes hopeful rather than hesitant. She begins to plan with confidence instead of caution. Her vision expands, her expectations elevate. She believes that growth, healing, and progress are possible even when evidence is limited. It also teaches her patience. She learns how to wait without anxiety and trust without frustration. She understands that timing plays a role in development and that progress often happens gradually. This patience strengthens her emotional maturity and protects her peace. As faith replaces fear, her life becomes calmer, clearer, and more purposeful. Her decisions align with wisdom instead of worry. Her energy shifts from survival to growth. Her confidence becomes steady rather than fragile. She moves forward with quiet courage and stable hope. She realizes that fear once controlled her reactions, but faith now guides her direction. The same challenges may still exist, but her response has changed. Her heart is anchored, her mind is disciplined, her spirit is confident. When faith becomes the default response, peace becomes the natural outcome. And in that peace, she finds strength, clarity, and unstoppable momentum. When inner growth is complete and a woman has been refined through seasons of solitude, healing, and surrender, God begins to position her for alignment and elevation in ways that feel both natural and purposeful. This stage does not arrive suddenly or randomly. It unfolds as the result of quiet preparation, character development, and spiritual maturity. Alignment is the moment when her inner world matches the direction of her destiny, and elevation is the visible unfolding of what was built invisibly. She begins to notice subtle shifts in her life. Upward, Unities start appearing that once felt unreachable. Conversations begin opening doors she did not force. Relationships form that carry mutual respect, shared values, and healthy support. Environments begin to match her growth. These changes are not accidents. They are evidence of readiness. She no longer chases validation or opportunity because alignment finds her when her heart is prepared to steward it wisely. Positioning requires maturity because elevation amplifies whatever already exists within a person. If insecurity dominates the heart, success will magnify insecurity. If fear controls the mind, responsibility will intensify anxiety. But when growth has strengthened confidence, humility, wisdom, and discipline, elevation becomes sustainable. She understands that preparation was necessary to protect her future, not delay it. As alignment unfolds, her discernment becomes even sharper. She recognizes which opportunities align with her values and which ones distract from her purpose. She no longer accepts everything that shines. She chooses what aligns. Her decisions become strategic, not emotional. She understands that every yes carries responsibility and every no preserves clarity. This wisdom protects her from burnout, compromise, and misalignment. Her relationships also reflect this elevation. She attracts people who respect her boundaries, support her growth, and encourage her purpose. Toxic cycles no longer repeat because her standards have risen. She no longer entertains unhealthy attachments or emotionally draining dynamics. Healthy connection becomes normal because she has healed the parts of herself that once accepted less. As her life expands, humility keeps her grounded. She remains teachable, grateful, and spiritually sensitive. She recognizes that growth did not come from self-effort alone, but from divine guidance, patience, and grace. This humility allows her to steward success wisely without losing balance or integrity. Elevation also brings responsibility. She becomes aware that her influence now affects others. Her words carry weight. Her actions model leadership. Her decisions impact more than just herself. This awareness strengthens her discipline and accountability. She becomes intentional about how she uses her time, energy, and influence. Alignment creates peace even in expansion. Although her life may become busier or more demanding, her spirit remains stable. She no longer feels scattered or overwhelmed because her priorities are clear. She knows where she is going and why. This clarity reduces stress and strengthens focus. She also becomes more confident in her voice. She expresses her ideas with clarity and courage. She no longer minimizes her value or hides her gifts. She understands that her growth was not meant to remain hidden, but to serve, inspire, and uplift others. Confidence flows naturally from self-awareness and purpose. Elevation changes how she views challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as ATS, she views them as opportunities for refinement. Growth continues even after alignment. She remains adaptable, resilient, and open to learning. Her mindset stays flexible, allowing her to evolve without losing direction. She recognizes that alignment is not just about success. It is about sustainability. It is about living in harmony with her values, purpose, and spiritual direction. She understands that true elevation is not measured only by external achievement, but by internal stability, peace, and integrity. As her life aligns with purpose, gratitude deepens. She appreciates the journey that shaped her. The waiting seasons, the lonely nights, the silent growth, all of it contributed to her readiness. She no longer resents the process because she understands its value. Her confidence becomes quiet but strong. She does not need to announce her growth. Her life reflects it. She moves with clarity instead of confusion. She walks with peace instead of pressure. She leads with wisdom instead of ego. Alignment also brings divine protection. Doors that do not serve her future close naturally. Distractions lose their attraction. Misaligned opportunities fade without conflict. Her path becomes cleaner, simpler, and more focused. She understands that positioning is ongoing. Growth never stops. Alignment continues to refine. Elevation expands responsibility. She remains committed to personal development, spiritual maturity, and emotional intelligence. One day she realizes that the preparation season did exactly what it was meant to do. It shaped her heart, sharpened her vision, strengthened her discipline, and clarified her purpose. Now her life flows in harmony with who she has become. She no longer needs to chase destiny. She walks in it. When a woman learns to depend fully on God, she becomes unstoppable. This is not about having perfect circumstances or flawless understanding, but about anchoring her life on a source that never fails. Dependence on God transforms her perspective, her priorities, and her power. She realizes that human support is temporary. Opinions can mislead and situations can shift, but God's presence, provision, and protection are constant. When she leans on him completely, fear loses its grip, uncertainty no longer paralyzes her, and challenges become opportunities to trust rather than reasons to worry. Dependence reshapes her mindset. Instead of reacting impulsively to every obstacle, she responds with faith. She no longer allows circumstances to dictate her peace because her confidence is rooted in divine assurance. Her decisions are guided by trust rather than anxiety. She learns to release the illusion of control, understanding that God orchestrates outcomes in ways beyond her comprehension. This trust frees her from stress and allows her to act with clarity and intentionality, even when situations are complex or uncertain. Reliance on God also builds resilience. Challenges, setbacks, and opposition no longer overwhelm her because she understands that every trial carries divine purpose. She develops the ability to endure without being shaken, to recover without bitterness, and to remain hopeful even when answers seem delayed. Her strength is not dependent on circumstances. It comes from a source that cannot be depleted. With God as her anchor, she remains steadfast, and her faith becomes a stabilizing force in turbulent times. Dependence also cultivates humility. She recognizes that her achievements, progress, and breakthroughs are not solely the result of personal effort. This awareness keeps pride in check and gratitude in motion. She celebrates victories with reverence, acknowledging God's hand in every step forward. Humility allows her to remain teachable, open to correction, and sensitive to guidance. She understands that wisdom comes from listening as much as acting, and that growth often occurs in quiet, unseen moments of obedience and trust. As dependence deepens, peace becomes her default state. She no longer seeks constant reassurance from people or situations. She is not easily swayed by criticism or comparison because her identity and confidence are anchored in God's truth. This peace allows her to think clearly, act deliberately, and interact compassionately with others. She becomes a source of stability, influence, and encouragement, radiating calm in environments that are otherwise chaotic or uncertain. Her priorities and choices align with divine guidance rather than human expectation. She is no longer driven by fear of loss, desire for approval, or need for control. Instead, she focuses on what matters for her growth, purpose, and calling. She becomes intentional about relationships, opportunities, and investments of her time and energy. Her dependence on God ensures that she is positioned correctly for divine opportunities rather than pursuing what is merely convenient or superficial. Dependence also strengthens her ability to persevere. She learns to walk through seasons of delay, uncertainty, and waiting without despair. Trust replaces frustration. Patience replaces panic. She understands that God's timing is perfect and that preparation often precedes promotion. The ability to remain steadfast in faith builds endurance and creates a spiritual foundation that cannot be shaken by temporary setbacks or external pressures. In this dependence, her influence grows. She becomes a woman who inspires others by example rather than by words alone. Her actions reflect integrity, faithfulness, and clarity of purpose. People are drawn to her because her life demonstrates stability, hope, and trust in God. She becomes a living testimony that when one relies fully on divine guidance and provision, miracles, breakthroughs, and transformation naturally follow. Ultimately, dependence on God does not make her passive or weak. It empowers her to live with confidence, boldness, and clarity. She learns that the strength to overcome, to endure, and to thrive comes from a source that never fails. Her life becomes a vessel of resilience, peace, and purpose, demonstrating that God's provision is sufficient in every season. When she depends fully on him, she is unstoppable because her foundation is eternal, unshakable, and alive. She walks forward with courage, knowing that every step is guided, every challenge is purposeful, and every blessing is divine. Her faith is her fuel, her trust is her anchor, and her life becomes a testament to the power of complete dependence on God. This dependence transforms her ordinary moments into extraordinary testimony, her trials into triumphs, and her journey into legacy. She is unstoppable because her strength is rooted in the eternal, her confidence anchored in the unchanging, and her hope secured in the everlasting presence of God. Outro, if this message inspired you, make sure to subscribe and join our community of faith-driven individuals. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a powerful sermon that can transform your life. Stay connected, stay motivated, and let God's word guide your journey every day.